Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. Bootlicker, shills, dead slay, stars, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, trans. I'm useful idiot. Welcome. And so the House passed legislation to ban trans from women's sports. And of course, I have a few things I'd like to say about that. First of all, it's sad, really, that it takes actual congressional action and legislation to ban trans from women's sports, something that should be common sense and something that shouldn't have gotten out of hand anyway. And one of my ideas, of course, is that women's sports should have boycotted in order to stop this illogical move. And it's really a no-brainer, but it took legislation to actually enforce something that should be common sense. And all one has to do is see the few second bout during the Olympics when a female boxer just got pummeled by a trans in a matter of seconds. And that should have closed the book on this whole episode as it is. It's just completely illogical and unfair, and particularly unfair to women. So this whole idea that in the name of inclusiveness, that biological men who transition to women should be allowed to participate in women's sports is just ludicrous. I understand the noble catalyst for this idea of inclusivity to do this, but it just made no sense, and it was just illogical, and it's a complete affront to women, and that was never part of the quotient for these people trying to be woke. And so one of the things to me that's astonishing is that 206 Democratic congressmen voted against this. And it shows that this whole woke agenda, no matter how illogical, no matter how unfair, is still ingrained in politicians and other people in higher echelons. And it's really unfortunate that 206 Democratic congressmen actually voted against it. So I'm glad it passed in spite of that. And the other thing I'd like to mention too, it's very telling that, of course, the inclusivity of trans men to women, or men to women, were allowed in women's sports pretty much on the lower levels, high school and college, and then and in the Olympics. Because there's a couple things that are telling about this. One is that no trans people that went from women to men are trying to compete in men's sports. So that's pretty telling. And another thing that's pretty telling is the fact that this idea never was considered for professional sports. So there weren't any trans women to men participating in professional NFL or hockey or basketball or anything like that. And they wouldn't allow it because they recognized the unfairness of it, particularly in a commercial arena, of course, and it just they couldn't allow something like that at that level. So I think that's pretty telling, and it shows a lot of hypocrisy. But the bottom line for me is that I totally get people who are transitioning and then want to identify as a different gender and then want to participate on that level. But it just goes against basic biology and any sense of logic that a man with his bone structures and his upper body strength and greater size generally and those kind of skills should be allowed to go toe to toe with women in women's sports. And so imagine women who are spending a good portion of their lives training to be the best in their field, and then they get trounced by a trans person who wouldn't stand a chance if they had to compete in their own gender. And so it just goes to show this whole social engineering idea and this whole gender equality issue is fine up to a point, and at some point you have to go back to biology and logic. And I go back to my first point again, that to extend this whole idea of woke to go against biology and logic, and it's so completely unfair to women It's just unbelievable. I can't believe we're living in a day and age where that we even have to talk about these issues. But here we are. So anyway, bravo. I'm glad this legislation passed. It shouldn't have been necessary for legislation, but here it is, and it passed. And it's a idea who's long overdue, even though it's only been a few years that this woke idea has been part of our culture. So bravo. I'm Useful Idiot. Don't you be one too.